I welcome you all in today's online talk on sex work and law, science justice, organized by Advanced Center for Women's Studies, School of Development Studies. Uh, Researchers and activists were in debate about sex work's need, morality, and law in the context of caste, class, and patriarchy. Even Maharashtra's socio-political discourse has dimension of debate between Raja Dhale, the Ambedkarite leader, and Durga Bhagwat, the sociologist. One cannot neglect ex-Governor Mohammad Fazl's statements on sex work's legality and support. Today's talk is mainly deals with sex work, laws related with it, especially ITPA, Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, and how laws are unsatisfactory for needs of livelihood, dignity, status of sex workers. The talk will focus on various aspects of sex workers' rights, criminalization of sex work, and sex workers and various perspectives, approaches on sex workers' lives and law related to it. Approaches of feminist groups towards the issue related with sex workers and law will be studied here. Straight to the point, main issue is the conflict and overlapping in absence of clear and separate understanding of trafficking and migration. Non-separation from migration, non-recognition of voluntary sex work, identification and penalization of third party, criminalization of sex workers, rescue and rehab model, and poor implementation of the legal provisions by authority are major issues and concerns of this law. Today we have Tejaswi Sevekari ma'am for this talk. She is postgraduate student working in this field for past 25 years. She is certified trainer to conduct empowerment workshops of Empowerment Institute USA. She is on the advisory board of National AIDS Research Institute, BJ Medical College, CRS, and AIDS Clinical Trial Network Global. Her focus is on HIV related issues in general and women in sex work particularly. She has initiated and coordinated the process of formation of Sex Workers Collective, a community-based organization in Pune, Saheli Sangh, on which she is presently the executive director. She is closely working as supporter of National Network of Sex Workers, NNSW, India. She had presented many papers at national and international conferences. She is currently pursuing PhD from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She is recipient of many regional, national, and international awards like Samaj Gaurav Puraskar, Savitribai Phule Award, Rashtriya Sanman Award, and Sharon Maxwell Award for Social Impact from USA. Now, I'm requesting ma'am to please enlighten us for this talk.
Okay, thank you, Inayat, for this introduction, and I'm really thankful to Advanced Center for Women's Studies and my guide, Dr. Meena Gopal, and Sujata ma'am for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences. I'm not a legal expert, but what I have learned working with sex workers for last 25 years, I'm trying my best to put it in front of you. My request is to please feel free to stop me in between if you have any questions, or if you don't agree also, because there are some point of views you might find it bit debatable. That is also possible, and I firmly believe that debate is also a way of effective communication. So if you don't agree to any of the statements which I will be presenting in front of you, please feel free to stop, ask, and debate. So, and for me, this online medium is really very tricky. I try my best to cope up with this. Very much a field person, so I miss the presence of people, around me. So, some of you, if you have the good internet connection, you can feel free to keep your videos on. That will help me a lot. Thank you. And yeah, I have prepared a small PPT for the clear understanding and keeping the entire discussion focused. Because when we speak about sex work and law in India or anywhere in the world, it's very much complicated matter, and the discussion can go for hours together. take it from me. Once you get into that, you will realize that it's really a very complex issue, and it doesn't give address to many of the core issues of sex workers, but it actually impacts their lives in a very negative way. So yeah, so I will try to share my screen and start the PPT.
Yeah, I'm just.
Able to find it.
Rajul. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Rajul, उनको course बना देगी so that she can share the.
हाँ जी.
Sorry, I was not able to send you it earlier.
No, that is okay. Now she will make you the course so you can share the screen.
Sure, sure.
Just a minute.
Yes, हो गया.
Okay. Yeah, now you please try.
Okay.
और किसी को बनाना है मैम?
इनायत तो बना है ना आप इनको?
जी, उनको बना दिया है.
हाँ, और उनको और मुझे तो ठीक है.
और एक देवरपल्ली मैम को भी को-होस्ट जस्ट बना के रखा है.
ओके ओके हाँ अच्छा एक अच्छा स्टूडेंट को करने की जरूरत नहीं.
सुभाश्री को बना दिया है बट सब स्टूडेंट प्रेजेंट है.
ओके 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 तेजस्वी.
Yeah, so my screen is visible to you?
I can't see.
Wait, I will try it again. Is it visible now?
Yeah, just fine.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay. So basically, in India and many parts of the world, sex work is sex workers group has always remained as socially discriminated and disadvantaged group. And when we speak about sex work, mainly we focus our sex and not otherwise, but it's a known fact, and I think everybody knows that there are many genders and identities just women. So that is very important for our common understanding. Understanding the nature of sex work, if we start with the figures, the data is very much debatable because the source of data is very complex. To get a clear understanding of the number of sex workers in India is a very difficult task because of the stigma and discrimination and criminalization by law. Hidden sex work is very, very common in India. And so it's very difficult to reach to the exact numbers of sex workers in India. So, but I can share some figures with you. Like in 2010, the registered numbers of women in sex work given by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare was 88,751. So that was the figure given by the ministry. According to the National Network of Sex Workers, with whom I am very closely associated and one of the supporter of the National Network, we work in Delhi, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Kerala, Jharkhand, Tamil Nadu, and Maharashtra. So our estimate, because we have taken these figures from our own members who are sex workers, both female, male, as well as transgender sex workers and non-binaries. So our figure says that the entire membership of the sex workers collective, which we have calculated, is 4,15,450. So that's the approximate numbers. You can also Google and you can search many places where you can get the data. But again, as I say, it's very difficult to give the exact numbers. You can also get the statistics from the national organization's website. It keeps on changing all the time. So that's also there. When we think about sex work, the common terms which struck to our mind is the definition of sex work. The terms one uses to define sex workers. Very common term is prostitution, which is used very commonly by the legal framework, not only in India, but anywhere in the world. Sex work is a term coined by an activist, actually, in 80s, Coral Young, and she has started using this term because prostitution is always defined as based on some, it's a derogatory term basically, and the people use specifically to explain provision of sexual services by women in exchange of money. So it doesn't encompasses all genders who are doing sex work, and sex work is used by activists and basically who are supporting the sex workers' right-based movement a lot, because it gives certain dignity of sex worker being workers. So that is always a preferred term which we use. Prostitution as a term is mainly remain as a legal definition of sex work. HIV/AIDS, everybody knows that all over the world, HIV was one thing which has started getting attention towards sex workers from the government, from the state, and the NGOs and activists also, and mainly public health care providers. So HIV/AIDS was, when the entire epidemic started around the 80s, people have started paying attention to sex workers more than before. Like that was a big thing. Trafficking, it's always a common understanding people have around sex work that all sex workers, and there starts the debate actually when it comes to practice. So lots of things we need to have total clarity around trafficking. Brothel is also defined in law in a different way from the understanding of the sex workers and the activists who are working with sex workers, because the understanding of brothel is very different than the understanding of the real people on the ground. Solicitation is also a debatable issue when it comes to the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, which I will be discussing soon. So solicitation, like inviting the customers or calling the customer, that is very commonly defined as solicitation and being penalized all the time. Another definition which we get from the legal framework is living on the earnings of sex worker. That is also a big debate and being challenged many times when it comes to rights of sex workers, because any person who is living on the earning of a sex worker, if that person is an adult, being treated as a criminal. So that is always a debate among the activists. Rescue and rehabilitation, it's also a term widely used mainly in order to address the trafficking issues, supporting the so-called traffic victims. And this model is a favorite one of the states where the basic perspective looking at sex workers and sex work is abolitionist. So in India, the rescue and rehab model has been widely promoted and used even by the state as well as the so-called anti-trafficking organizations and NGOs working in India, and supported by many Western countries and funding agencies. So this is a very common understanding in and around sex work. These are very common. Which Office of Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, their report says that India is source, destination, and transit country for sex trafficking and forced labor. and they believe that millions of women and children are victims of trafficking in India. So our entire perspective comes from there when it comes to trafficking. And that's why it is very difficult for the activists and even the persons who are engaged in sex work to alienate themselves from from trafficking and getting recognition as workers or having voluntary entry into sex work. When law defines trafficking, it defines process, means, sources of trafficking, and the law considers trafficking as the only way sex work takes place, or in the legal term, prostitution takes place in India or different parts of the world. So it's very important for us to understand the legal definition of trafficking and the laws around that. Now, when we speak about legal approaches towards sex work, we can frame in three main perspective towards legal frameworks all over the globe. First approach is prohibition, like you prohibit something, like completely prohibit doing sex work. Aspect, abolition is the aspect which we are using in India. So what do you mean by prohibition? So it says that all forms of sex work is unacceptable and therefore illegal. So that means we say entire sex work and people working as sex workers are illegal entities. So everything is criminalized, everything. So it's not allowed in those states for any person to work as sex work. Forget about clients and pimps and brothel keepers and all those entities are completely criminalized, but at the same time sex workers are also being criminalized. So no sex work altogether. So this is you can say the USA follow this complete prohibition of sex work. Legalization, many activists were also thinking that legalization could be an answer to many of the worries and concerns of sex workers, but unfortunately that is a very remote possibility when it comes to countries like India or anywhere in the world, because legalization means giving your entire control to the state, and state will decide who will be a sex worker, who will not be a sex worker, what will be the rules and regulation around sex work. They will define everything and you need to follow that. And if you don't follow, then directly you become a criminal. And with you are supposed to have massive penalties around it. So licensing, registration, mandatory health checkups will be a part of it. Anything outside these defined criteria by the government or the state becomes a criminal activity. So you will be highly penalized under that. These are few countries which have a legalization aspect towards sex work. They have legalized sex work in this manner. And when it comes to South Asian countries, many people, including many activists in India, were thinking that what if things can be legalized in Thailand, why not in India? But we need to understand that most of the Thailand's economy is based on tourism, and sex tourism is a big economic support for the country. And so, but we also know what are the side effects of legalization. So that has been always remain a debate in India, and it's still going on in many parts of even academics and practice. So you'll find this debate is still going on in India. Abolition, this is a very kind of, we can say, we are following it from the British rule, because if you see the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, it is having almost all the compliances which are there in the British law. So we are following it, and we have Immoral Traffic Prevention Act very much in place since 1956, with minimum changes happened in the law till today, and only the name has been in change, so I will go about it in some while. But abolitionist approach is very, very strong, mainly supported by the anti-trafficking lobby and very strong law for your information when prevention of trafficking. Actually, law hardly prevents criminalization took place when it comes to prevention of trafficking. And if you see the statistics, you will find that the actual culprits who are the traffickers are getting booked under the workers who are not jails but correction homes, because entire understanding of this abolitionist approach is thinking that sex work is against social norms and stability, and so it is the responsibility of the state as citizens to abolish sex work. This is the origin. Can you hear me? Connection was lost.
That's what I was wondering. I was just wondering कि मुझे नहीं आ रहा है कि that's what I was trying again. अच्छा आपकी ओर से था. Okay, now we can hear you.
Yes,
Okay. So
Yeah, you were on abolition part.
yes. So okay. So my slide is visible to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So
it has come from the first slide.
Scan. Sorry?
Yeah. That's what I was saying. It came from the first slide.
Yeah. Now this is the abolition aspect. So we are following the abolitionist approach in India, and so we are having so many challenges when it comes to the legal framework and addressing lots of concerns of sex workers and activists working with sex workers. So as I say, it's based on total abolitionist and British legal framework. It has a very strong double standard in the law itself, because the consideration of the entry of sex work as per the legal definition is all are traffic victims. So one part of the legal framework considers sex workers as victims of trafficking, but at the same time, the same law criminalizes sex workers under other clauses of ITPA, like solicitation in public place is illegal, living on the earning of a sex worker is illegal, brothel keeping is illegal, doing sex work in public place is illegal. So all the other parts, excluding the trafficking part, is treated as criminal. So the same woman can be penalized as well as she can be treated as a victim of trafficking. So this is the double standard of the legal framework in India. And so that's always been a challenge for the activists in the field and the sex workers who are the leaders of the community-based organizations in India. So criminalization is the core, you will say, takes place in all the legal provisions in India, Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, Indian Penal Code, as well as there are several state laws prohibit certain things and penalize sex workers in different situations. We can discuss it further. So, but the big mammoth is Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, and in short, I have tried to put it in front of you that how all these four main sections of ITPA has are making tremendous negative impact on the life of sex workers. The history of ITPA is very interesting. The original law was the name of the original law in 1956 was SETA, that is Suppression of Immoral Traffic Act. Then it has changed to PETA, Prevention of Immoral Traffic Act. And now the law is called as Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. So the law is not willing to leave this immoral term. And we always wonder, like, we always say that trafficking is definitely a non-accepted thing. Trafficking is immoral, then what is moral trafficking? That we don't know. So this is the challenge, like, you know, and the law should not be subjective using terms like this, you know, morality. The law should not use the terms, but unfortunately there we are. So these are the four sections of Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, which have huge implications on the lives of sex workers. Traffic victim, like it's a double standard, you know. They criminalize the entry of sex workers into sex work, and there is no space remained for the voluntary entry of persons into sex work. So whether the person has entered into sex work voluntarily or through trafficking, that remains totally you know, not a question for the legal system, because the entire perception towards sex work that it is trafficking. So that creates lots of issues for the voluntary sex workers who are working on their own violation. Arrest and penalization happens to any person. Like it might be the client of a sex worker, it might be her relative, it might be her elder son. Like, you know, if a person is above the age of 18 years, then that person can be criminalized, you know, can be penalized very easily. The parents, old parents of sex workers can be penalized in the context of living on the earning of a sex worker. The section 8B says the solicitation of clients is an offense, because solicitation in public place is a crime. Now solicitation happens with so many other businesses and business houses and shops and professions. What are these all advertisements? You know, you will see so many advertisements and sale kind of advertisement all over the media. So that is not solicitation. But when it comes to a sex worker who's standing on a street and calling her customer, that is being penalized under this clause. So this is another challenge which we face. Another concern of the implementation of the ITPA is section 30, that is number 2. Like, it has lowered the rank of the police officer who can organize and put raid on the red light areas. So it has been now very difficult times. I remember when the entire formation of Saheli was taking place around 95. You know, our peer educators who are sex workers have gone through tremendous harassment and exploitative responses from the police, because they used to find out that these women are carrying condoms in their purses, you know, like, and they were being because they were working for HIV prevention at that time. And so that was a big issue the initial HIV prevention program faced and gone through a lot of rivalries with the police department. And, you know, it was a big struggle for all the HIV program and activists at that time. So there are almost no changes happen in ITPA, but yeah, then when the Justice Verma committee was appointed after the Delhi rape case, they have actually widened the definition of trafficking. So in one way, it has helped to certain level for those activists who were continuously working to prevent trafficking, because the definition was enlarged. But at the same time, there was a minimum room remain again for the voluntary entry of persons into sex work. So the National Network of Sex Workers and the All India Network of Sex Workers, both networks have submitted their own reports, shadow reports, and lots of community consultation went. And then ultimately, the Justice Verma Committee has given reply to National Network of Sex Workers that we are defining trafficking, and we are saying that this broad definition of trafficking, it is including children and not the adults who are entering into sex work on their own volition. So that was some relief which all of the activists got after that big struggle. Now, it's very interesting to understand the legal system in India around sex work. People usually believe that there is only ITPA, but no, there are several other provisions in legal system. There are Indian Penal Code, which defines, criminalizes, and punishes trafficking. Now, when the police raid takes place in a red light area, police usually booked the sex workers as well as the so-called traffickers under ITPA, then Article 370. And then it becomes a very difficult and challenging position for the people who want to support those who are not the real culprits. So it has always been a big challenge, because arbitrary use of ITPA, IPC, and different state laws is very, very common experience of the people and the sex workers and their supporters. So another example of the state law is Bombay Police Act. And it is also an act which is not meant for sex workers, but used for almost 99% for against sex workers. Section 110 and 117, they define, they penalize public nuisance and indecent behavior in public place. And if you get to know the statistics, you will find that 99% of these persons get penalized under this particular Bombay Police Act section. These two sections are sex workers. It might be female sex workers, male sex workers, or transgender sex workers. Another act is Anti-Beggary Act, which earlier there were 22 states were having these acts. It prevents and penalizes the persons who are begging. This act is rampantly used against transgender sex workers, because you might be aware that there are different cults in transgenders who will ask for money in you will find so many transgenders close to the signals. So they will ask for money, and some of the transgenders are also involved in sex work. Some of the transgenders both, and they call this as mangti in their term, and they also do sex work. So this particular act has been rampantly used against transgenders, not so much against the women in sex work, but mostly against transgenders. But that is also been used, and yeah, and it has provisions of penalty as well as arrest. Recently, there was a big action taken against in Pune against transgenders under this particular act. So many transgenders have been penalized and arrested. So what happens when the legal framework of a state is considering sex workers as criminals? I always explain this as it creates the criminalization, the impact we can define in 5 Ds. Like, first of all, you will deny them the dignity of a human being. You will deny them various services which are meant for the common citizens of any state or any country. The integration of the community of sex workers into mainstream community, you will deny all those things from them. When you deny certain group of people in the mainstream, ultimately that group becomes a disadvantageous group in any society, which leads to deprivation. They get deprived of the basic facilities, basic needs are also not getting fulfilled. So deprivation is a common phenomenon you will find no matter what category of sex workers you will work with them, interact with them, you will find that this is a common phase. The sex workers often get deprived economically, socially, financially, culturally also, and from society, like nobody wants them. So that's common perception even sex workers have towards their own self. Discrimination is like, like the word they live in. Everybody wants to get benefit of sex workers getting discriminated. That's very complex thing. But the sex workers collectives, the leaders of sex workers, they always say that the people who are so-called claiming that they are working for us, they also discriminate us. So this is very big D in their life, where they get severely discriminated by even the activists who are working with them. So what will be the condition of the state and the mainstream society, you can imagine. And all these four things, denial, being disadvantageous group of the community, getting deprived of all the sources and facilities and services of the state, and discrimination leads to disconnect. So you will find this disconnect not only among the society, but even in the legal system, because sex work, the basic ground of sex work is always been this. It's a morally justified. State will always find that it's a moral justification that the person who is doing sex work is an immoral act, and so they need to be penalized. So this is the common understanding towards sex work in India. It's very, very common. So what we want? So this is I'm presenting this slide with the courtesy of Sangram and VAM, which are our partners of National Network of Sex Workers and one of the founder members. So each sex worker dream about decriminalization of sex work, not only sex worker, but the entire trade, because it is very, very necessary that sex work should get treated as a profession in India, and they should give the respect and right to live their lives like any ordinary citizen of India. So that's the demand of sex workers right-based organization. It is always been a struggle of the sex workers in India to achieve the status of laborers, workers. And that's why many sex workers collective are trying to establish their own trade unions, but that's not happening. Several of community-based organizations and sex workers collective have been denied to registered sex workers unions as unions, like labor unions. So nobody has getting any sanction to get registered themselves as union. The name you might be aware of, Karnataka Sex Workers Union, but they are registered under charity. They are not registered as union. The name only has the term union, but they are also denied several times to get themselves registered as union. So there we are criminalizing clients. It's also been a big debate. Anti-trafficking organization always believe that legalization is the answer to a certain extent, because they put the Swedish law, where it has been clearly mentioned that in Sweden, selling sex is not a crime, but buying sex is a crime. So that wave also has gone through in India a few years back, and our entire network has agitated against that. So criminalization clients means stopping the business of sex workers. So nobody wants that the criminalization of clients should take place in India. Why decriminalization? Because the distinction between trafficking and entry needs to be clarified, needs to be understood very clearly and going into the depth of the issue. Otherwise, the entire trade and the persons involved in sex work are going to get criminalized often. And, repeated offenders is also one term the police and the judiciary often used against sex workers, and they call them as repeated offenders. And so repeat punishment is a common factor you will find when it comes to sex workers and penalization of sex workers. There should not be a specific regulation imposed by the state on sex workers. That's a demand from the sex workers right-based organizations. It's always a demand which we keep raising in different forums wherever we get opportunity. All the necessary policies, processes, schemes should consider sex workers as workers, and that dignity should be given to them. Otherwise, the entire human rights is going to be there as a reality for sex workers, thousands and crores of sex workers in India and around the world. So that needs to be done. Respecting and giving all rights and responsibilities as common citizens. Sex workers don't need a special treatment. They just need to accept them as common citizens of our country. That's all. They are not asking for any special provisions for that matter. Now, when it comes to debate, in my abstract, I have mentioned that even the feminist activists, because we are from our own women's study department, it's very interesting debate happens all over the world, and also in India, that different feminist groups have polarized identities and issues when it comes to sex work. So the perception is different among the different feminist activists in India, because their conceptual understanding about consent is different. It is very difficult for some feminists who believe in abolitionist principles. They consider sex work as the outcome of patriarchy, and that's why they consider sex work is exploitation, sex work is violence, sex work is trafficking. And that's why they always oppose sex work and decriminalization approach when it comes to Indian scenario. So that's very common. It is very convenient to establish the rescue and rehabilitation model by the feminist activists as part of prevention of trafficking and prevention of exploitative practices in sex work. But if you go through research and studies done by several scholars, activists, and lawyers, you will find that rescue and rehab model is a big failure everywhere, not only in India, because you will find so many cases of atrocities against sex workers who have been sent to the rehabilitation centers, so-called correction homes. Now, rehabilitation center is a term used by the activists and the social workers. But if you see the legal definition says that the traffic victim should be sent to a corrective home. It means that they consider sex work as immoral behavior. And if you want to change the behavior of the person, you need to send that person to a corrective home. So this is the common understanding in our legal framework. And without taking any consent of the person, when the rescue operation takes place, so-called, they will raid the area, they will take all the women in the brothel into the custody and send them to the correction centers. So here the consent doesn't matter, because the entire understanding of women in sex work is that they are traffic victims. So nobody is bothered to take their consent whether they want to get out of red light area and sex work or not. So the legal framework and the entire approach towards law makes difference and different opinions among the activists in India, especially the feminist activists in India. And as I say, the definitions of violence, exploitation, entry and exit from sex work is also a very big and interesting debate happen. You know, like one of our academic, like she's Dr. Rohini Sahani, she has just completed and published a report around rescue operations, and she has actually tracked few sex workers who have been rescued and sent to the correction home. So what happened with them and what happened with them afterwards, you know, when they get out of the rescue homes, shelter homes and so-called rehabilitation center. So it's she has clearly mentioned one thing, it's a really wonderful statement which she came up. Like she's saying that, okay, consider these women have been forced into sex work without their consent, but when they have been forced again to get rescued, what about their consent? You know, because when they enter into sex work, if the consent is a question, then what happens when you actually rescue them, so-called, without their consent? So actually the violence happens at both the ends, entry and exit. So that's a debate all the activists are going through a lot when it comes to this typical model. Another factor is also necessary for the people who want to understand sex work and sex workers' conditions in India. We also need to understand the change of sex work is changing a lot. You know, the type of business, the practices into business has changed. Now, because of the technology, especially the smartphone, the solicitation part has changed. The so-called definition of PIMS and agents, their place has been taken by the smartphone. Women don't need their agents now. Most of them, they are dependent upon the smartphones. They can have their customers can have their numbers and they can just call their customers, or customer can call the sex worker and come and visit her. So they hardly need these commission agents and PIMS. So that reality, the so-called anti-trafficking organizations and rescue rehab program hardly ignore. They ignore this reality. They hardly recognize this, that the business has changed tremendously. Brothel setting is also changing in the red light area because since a few years now, we are witnessing huge shift from the brothel to non-brothel based sex workers. Like the brothel areas are shrinking in India. You might be aware about Kamatipura. I remember when I started working with sex workers in 95, Kamatipura was having 14 lanes, but now it has been shrunk to 4 lanes. Similar thing has happened in Delhi, Ahmedabad. Pune also is shrinking. Pune brothel-based sex workers are shifting to the non-brothel-based settings. They are shifting and getting displaced in different parts of the city. So these things are becoming quite visible now. The brothel, the definition of brothel, I don't know whether you know the definition of brothel as per Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. It says that 2 persons who are doing sex work, that place is treated as brothel. Simple. So even though doing sex work is not illegal in India, brothel keeping is illegal. That's why even though there is not a brothel keeper, usually we know that there is a brothel keeper in the red light area, and there are several girls staying with her in the brothels, and she will take the money from them. 50% of her earnings the brothel keeper will take. This is a common practice you will find in most of the red light areas, which is changing again. But the definition of brothel says that 2 persons providing sexual services in exchange of money, and where they are providing those services, it is considered as brothels. It is considered as brothels. So even though there is no exploitative practice, even though those persons, 2 persons staying together are doing sex work still and doing voluntarily, still it is considered as brothel and it can be penalized. The persons can be penalized for running the brothel. So this is the definition. changing trend is very, very visible in cities as well as in different small district places in India. And so if we say the number of incidences happening against sex workers, the violence happens against sex workers from the clients, from the brothel keeper, has come down tremendously. Now the violence which women and other sex workers like transgenders and male sex workers are facing is mainly from the state, mainly from the police, mainly from the local goons and maybe political personalities, so these are the persons who are being violent towards sex workers, not a typical kind of brothel setting now. Networking is also becoming a big trend now in sex work areas and sex workers in India, because persons are coming together. Sex workers are getting collectivized. They are forming their own help groups, their own community-based organizations. And in India, for your information, we have two networks of sex workers. One which was the original network of National Network of Sex Workers, and another one is All India Network of Sex Workers. So, and we are connected with the international network of sex workers. So it is also changing, and sex workers are getting more and more aware about this formation of networks and getting stronger together. We are also finding out that the public perception towards sex work is also changing. I remember when I started working, getting a paid staff to work in our project was a challenge, but now I'm finding it very easy to get volunteers, interns from different streams, both from India as well as from abroad, who are very keen and very willing to come and work with sex workers projects and collectives, and to learn and know about their lives and do something about the entire issue. So this has been a trend since a few years. And so, but if we not able to see this changing trend, we are still going to stick to our original stance of getting rid of sex workers and sex work, and creating the entire debate of trafficking, and creating the entire debate around sex work and trafficking and conflict among them. This changing trend, I can give you a very recent example of this changing trend, is that during this COVID and lockdown phase, sex workers have gone through tremendous hardships. And for the first time, NHRC, National Human Rights Commission, has released an advisory where they have given recognition to sex workers as part of informal sector labor, unorganized sector and informal sector workers. And all the sex workers rights organization has wholeheartedly accepted that. And we were very thankful to NHRC for the first time acceptance of sex workers in the workers category. But you know what? We have gone through a tremendous backlash from the anti-trafficking lobby at the same time, and so it was such a strong lobbying by the anti-trafficking organizations that NHRC has again released, they have not taken it back, because we have provided tremendous support and huge campaign took place. So they have not taken away all the advisory, but they have made a release that we are only considering adults, and we are also only considering for the COVID relief that sex workers should be considered as informal and unorganized sector workers. So yeah, so there we are, and it's a big struggle. So changing the law is going to be a massive task, which will not give definitely. But we really need people to have a clear understanding about how criminalization is impacting lives of sex workers in a very, very negative manner. So yeah. I think I will stop here, and I will give the control to Sujata.
Yeah. Yeah, you can stop sharing. So it will, yeah.
Yes. I hope it got stopped. I don't know.
Yeah, it will stop.
Okay. Thank you.
There was one question which I saw in the chat. Inat, would you like to go ahead with talking about a question?
Yes. Stock is for question and answer session now. Ask students questions by typing it in chat box. There is one question from Others Soni. Ma'am, you were talking about earnings of sex work.
Yeah.
By living off the earnings of sex work, do you mean sex work being the primary source of income?
Yes, Adarsh, for your question, I'm just trying to put 2 points in front of you. This is not my answer. Okay, this question have been asked to many sex workers often, that what is about your earning? Don't you think that whatever you earn is your own money? Definitely, it's their own money, and so they should have a right to decide where that money will go. Like all the professionals, all the workers, all the people who work and earn, whether they are doing their jobs or their profession or their business, why we earn? We earn for ourselves and for our families. So same thing sex workers are doing. So many of them, they are the primary source of income for their family. They are the breadwinners of their family. That is a fact. So that's a reality. And there are huge number of sex workers. They're supporting their families as additional income also. So both are the realities, but the class which usually the sex workers collectives are getting formalized are from that strata of the economic system of our state, that they are the primary breadwinners of their families, and they're taking care of their kids, their elderly parents, and the family at home. So yes, that's true.
Yes, Pragya ma'am, you can ask question. Hello, Pragya ma'am, can you hear me?
Hello,
Yes, ma'am.
am I audible?
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
I think you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm a student here. So, ma'am, I had a question. So, I was reading this article long back. I don't exactly remember the source, but from anti-trafficking activist side, this was an argument against decriminalization of sex work, which did quote some studies, and it said that it does lead to increasing trafficking. So, I would like to know your views or any proposed solutions for it, or just like if you want to
Sorry, I just want to know that you mean that the article says that legalization will lead to trafficking?
Yes, increase in trafficking cases.
Okay.
It did quote some data from some countries saying that their trafficking has increased in this way. So that is why I wanted to know your views and
See, one
there is any
thing,
proposal.
yeah, thank you. There are many viewpoints around legalization and prevention of trafficking. To tell you very honestly, all the so-called prevention of trafficking laws are not actually preventing trafficking, because if you study the source from where the sex workers are getting trafficked, where they are working as sex work, which is often treated as called as destination, like source and destination. There is one process which takes place where it is called as transit. So if you see this process, you will find out that law doesn't work at the source level. Now there are ample cases, missing cases getting registered in villages, in poor families, that the girl has been missing. What happens with her? No prevention happens at that point. That girl can get trafficked, we don't know. And when she is into the trafficking happens, she will get into a red light area, getting sold into a red light area, or maybe somewhere else. And at that point, the law will take action. They will so-called rescue her and dump her in a shelter. Is it going to happen? So legalize sex work. It is a big debate, and it's a big thing, like whether legalization is really going to prevent trafficking. So ultimately, we stand for decriminalization. We never say sex work should be legalized, because we all know legalization or law is not answers to many social problems in our country, especially when it comes to stigma, discrimination, like the sex workers being treated. So law is not an answer. That's I think we need to understand very clearly. So we are not asking for legalization, because legalization is going to have their own limitations. Legalization is going to have, again, if the government is pro sex workers, it might be useful. But if it is going to be against sex workers, the life of sex workers are going to be a mess. And when we say trafficking, prevention of trafficking, we need to have stricter laws to prevent trafficking, not to penalize the traffickers later on, and not to send the woman to a corrective place against her wish. That's not going to happen. So definitely we need to have stricter laws for prevention, which is not happening anywhere. That's the reality.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It's very true. The law is not an answer to all, or rather, you don't get everything what you wanted through the law. Or sometimes I feel, once there is a law, one would go on finding the loopholes to it, and then, so actual solution may not be there. But at the same time, it is true that we do need laws, and it reflects the changes in the society.
Yeah.
But then it's a tricky thing.
Yes, it is tricky, and it requires lots of understanding of the issue. The legal framework sits around some assumptions and some research which is one-sided. So to get a holistic picture, you need to listen to the community and not just to the activists. So not a single law, not a single legal committee, or the committee who is making changes or giving suggestions to the Ministry of Law, they don't consult sex workers. If you're preparing law for sex workers or whatever, issues around sex workers, you need to consult sex workers. That doesn't happen. And unfortunately, the so-called anti-trafficking lobby is so strong in India. Their voice is like, everybody can hear their voices, but not of the community, actually, who is going to suffer a lot. Now, even the bill is still pending in the parliament. There is a proposed anti-trafficking, there is a proposed change going to happen in ITPA, and it might be a disaster. We don't know. And that's still a hanging sword. They're struggling against it. We don't know what will happen, because currently it has been a practice in the government that so many legal changes are happening without any consultation, without any process, just like that. So we don't know what will happen.
And one more danger is, as you are stated with it, saying a morality to be connected to the law, so
yes,
that's much more a danger.
Yeah.
This question from
I have a question.
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Yes.
Actually, I have a question because, when you talked about ITPA, you did mention about a clause where making, earning from sex work would earn you a criminal. It will technically criminalize, right? It will be criminalized. So I just wanted to know if where does the law stand when it comes to communities where this has been a traditional profession? I mean, in certain communities in India, it
Yeah.
is kind of a profession. So where does the law stand there? So I just kind of like got that question somewhere in my head. So thought maybe.
No, it gives space for the state to prepare another laws, like for example, the Devdasi system has been banned completely. That doesn't mean that there are no more Devdasis. There are Devdasis. So those traditions which the law has always tried to ban or suppress or penalize, that's not the answer, and that's what the entire, there are some communities like Bedia Batra community, there are Vaghya Murari in Maharashtra, there are so many different communities which are practicing, and it's a family kind of occupation. Who are we to decide what they are doing is wrong? It's their choice. Why can't we respect that? And if the mainstream society is not respecting, ultimately where the government comes from, where the judiciary comes from, it comes from us only. So if the community, the mainstream society is not accepting person's decision to follow some practice or some profession by their own choice, the government is, or the legal framework is going to follow the same thing. So, and there are several penalization happen against those communities. Arbitrary implementation of law does take place when it comes to those communities. Especially, there is always a conflict between migration and trafficking around these communities who are traditionally involved in sex.
So, ma'am, in your words, there is no actual legal protection for them in any sense.
No. And that's why I always say it sounds justice, It doesn't give any justice to sex workers. No justice at all. So, yeah.
There is another question from Fatima Hassan. He wants to ask, talk about feminist activists that they see sex work as a result of patriarchy and not as separate working area. I want that how much it is the result of patriarchy, if it is, and how much it is a separate working area like any other.
Yeah. Yes, many activists say that it's a result of patriarchy because it is always seen that sex work is exploitation. Sex work is exploitation of a woman. And that's why usually patriarchy, why feminists oppose patriarchy? Because it says that it gives secondary status to the women and it introduces many exploitative practices against women and violence. So same logic been applied to sex work as an outcome of patriarchy. And that's why many eminent feminists oppose sex work because they consider that it is outcome of patriarchy. That is one stance many feminist activists do take against sex work. They say that we are not against the women who are doing sex work, but we are against the entire practice of sex work because it's a exploitative practice. But another group of feminists will always consider that if you don't give this space to sex workers as a safe space to work as workers, it is going to remain an exploitative practice. You need to take the exploitation out of sex work. That's the entire debate and argument between the activists usually take place. Separate working area means accepting that yes, sex work is work and sex work is is a labor like any other labor. Sex workers are workers. So unless we accept this and give them that space, exploitation is not going to go away. Violence is not going to go away. And criminalization is also not going to go away. So this is very important that we figure out the space for sex workers. Decision to continue or discontinue. It should be their decision and not of any other person.
There is another question, interesting question from Natasha Negi.
Yeah.
Can
The names of communities referring to the classes. So there are several communities in India, like Vedia and Bachra community in north. There is Devdasis are mainly from Karnataka and South India, some parts of South India. And Bhagya Murali is, it's usually it's very close to Devdasi system. It is prevalent in Maharashtra. It's very common in Maharashtra. And there are other communities. See, in all parts of, in different states, somewhere or the other, you will find that this system is there. And it is very interesting to go through the history of sex work in India. You know, you might find out very interesting articles and studies and documentation done before the British rule. You know, sex work was very different at that time. This entire commercial aspect comes after the British rule. The red light areas emerge after the British rule. The form of sex work which used to happen before the British was very different. It was very beautifully woven into the system, the cultural system of our society, but it has completely changed after the British law, British rule come into place. So that's a very interesting journey. The history of sex work happen in India.
Arundhati?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. First of all, thank you so much for that
I can
talk.
see some hands and some questions, so I'm confused. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, ma'am, for that talk. It was really informative. So I had two questions. The first one is a little bit technical. It's on like understanding jurisdiction itself. So like we recently came across this case in Kerala where a lot of women were, you know, taken to Saudi and the Middle East in the name of getting them work in like domestic areas,
Yeah.
and they were you know, trafficked into sex work and things like that. So in a country like Saudi Arabia itself specifically, where it is prohibited, how does one hold accountability for the entire thing? Like who is held accountable? And if these girls have to go and seek like some kind of safety and things like that, who do they go and approach in such a situation? Like how do they approach that they are being you know, lured into sex work? Is the first question I have. And the second one is the entire like confusion I have with decriminalizing it and legalizing it. So I understand that, you know, law is not the answer to it, but when we think about like other, you know, redressal mechanisms, like something like human rights or something like job security and things like that, how does decriminalization then help versus something like legalization?
Okay. So the third part of your question was trafficking of women from South India to the Middle East, right? Now, your question is having half the answer. Now, in Middle East, sex work is entirely criminalized. You know, they don't accept sex work at all. Then how trafficking took place? See, it's very clear in a very blunt language. I can say it's a matter of demand and supply, like any other business. Where there is demand, the supply is going to happen. Same thing happen, whether there is law, there is prohibitionist law, there is abolitionist law, or there is taxation. This is the fact. Like when the demand is there, supply is going to happen, no matter what are the legal standing that particular nation has. So that is one part. So it clearly says that sex work is happening in Middle East. You will find out anywhere where the sex work is entirely banned, there also sex work do take place because there is demand. Now, when it comes to legal remedy, the women, those who are the traffic victims, who are in Middle East right now, maybe, they will get the protection as per the law because they are foreigners. They are not the citizens of that particular country. So they will get the benefit of the provisions for protection for foreign nationals. they will also give heavy penalization, heavy penalties and arrest and other procedures by law to their own nationals in Middle East. Those they consider as traffickers. So they will have their own legal provisions. Now, sending these women back as victims of trafficking is another nightmare. Usually the women will go through. The legal system, the entire rescue and repatriation process doesn't give any space for trauma counseling, because you need to understand the women have gone through tremendous trauma. Law doesn't give that space. Law doesn't provide any trauma counseling at that particular point. And the process which law will follow to send these women back home is very tedious. So these women are going to suffer a lot, and they usually happen like that. And when they come back to their native places, it's all over the world already that they have been trafficked and they have been into sex work, or they were sold into sex work. What about their inclusion in their families and their society, in their communities and their neighborhood? That's always remain a challenge. So, it's not 1 + 1 = 2 kind of answer to your question, but these are the facts. And that's why it is very necessary. I will emphasize it again that decriminalization is the answer, not legalization. Because when you say that sex work is not a crime, trafficking should be a crime, no doubt about that. But you need to have clear two entities, trafficking and sex work. Otherwise, if you mix both, it's going to be a big challenge, even for the victims, to get the justice. So when you say decriminalize sex work, that means you are accepting that, yes, sex workers are there. They are doing their business. They are earning for themselves and their families. They are not criminals, and they are not victims also. It's very, very empowering for the sex workers who are working with their own violation. So this is very important stand we as an activist need to take, who believe in these principles. There might be a few among us that those who don't believe that sex work can happen voluntarily. So, respect to all the differences, I think I've tried my best to address your question.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm so sorry, but if I could just add, like, would decriminalization also provide alternatives for women? So I'm just assuming the case where women are trying to transition from, okay, I voluntarily get into sex work, but okay, now I want to shift into another occupation. So even that is there, right? The stigma associated with sex work. So does decriminalization help in that smooth transition?
Definitely, because decriminalization will not give you a label that you are a victim, that you are a criminal. That transition becomes very easy for the person who want to move. Like any professional who want to change his or her profession can do that very easily, isn't it? Same thing. But the basic assumption when it comes to voluntary sex work, at the back of our mind, we always think that she has entered sex work because of these reasons. Even though she was not a traffic victim, she entered into sex work because of these reasons. Now, tell me, because I remember this incident, and I will just narrate in very short, try to summarize it. There was a government officer who has visited our organization, and he was completely trying to understand the decriminalization process. And he said that, okay, we'll provide you alternate livelihood options. Why you don't leave sex work and do something else? When sex workers were saying, we are here by our own choice. We earn good money out of sex work. We can survive better with our limited skill sets and educational limitations. We earn much more than any other profession. So why we should leave? Now, it is getting very difficult for that gentleman to understand this, that what he was thinking was a total moral perspective like any other person from the Western society, that sex work is immoral, sex work is bad, is dehumanizing, and that's why all the sex workers should leave and do something else. So do something else means what? That is our perception. What about the woman who is there? She's a real person. Let her decide. And what about giving opportunities, creating those opportunities, equal opportunities? Are we doing that? So we don't have a right, like even for rehabilitation measures, people have very petty examples, like, okay, we'll teach you how to stitch the cloths, tailoring, candle making, pickle making and all, or you just do the tailoring course and you will start earning. Why can't people think of a garment factory for a huge group of sex workers to start some other business? Why can't you think, like, dream big for this community? That hardly happens. So, it goes both way actually. So thank you.
Tejaswini had raised the hands.
Yes.
Yes, and there is two messages here. I got a direct message to me. Can I address it?
Yes, ma'am.
If you
Why?
don't mind. Or should I? Yeah. You mentioned about the need to listen to the community. There are books by Nalini Jamila who expose multiple layers of being a sex worker. Could you please shed some light on such articulations by sex workers in India through writing? Yes, a lot of writing has been done by activists as well as sex workers themselves. And as I always believe in having a complete picture, a comprehensive kind of understanding of sex work and around sex work, I think Nalini Jamila is one example. There are ample stories which are not getting published. So, we need to have our own focus very wide to understand the nitty-gritties of the issue and the plight of sex workers. I think that's very essential. So yeah, I can suggest that.
Tejaswini Padarika, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, ma'am. Very nice to hear you. Actually, it's not like a question, but I just had to add on to what you have been discussing. So first of all, I your articulation is about agency, right? How
Yeah.
the idea of vulnerability, which is always associated to any form of work, right now when we discuss about labor rights and discuss about women's right to work and anything, even if we are going and studying in government industry, or we are talking about Maria Mind's articulation of workers and associations, and how the process of the idea of exploitation has been so dominant in every field of research that we completely forget to address that there are certain point of there are certain locations where people are finding more um, I won't use the word empowering, but there is certain amount of agency in uh, practicing their work, which helps them do better. And and I think so, while I have an example, for example, I read this in book by Sheila Jeffrey, The Industrial Vagina, which is one of the most radical feminist standpoint to understanding what sex work should be, or what sex trafficking should be, or what is the concept of comfort woman. So we should I think after listening to the of course I have gained a lot of interesting points, but the very important location that we as researcher, I feel we need to have is uh, understand that there are certain different positionality and phenomenological understanding of experiences which are very, very different from that the narrative which our state gives to every discussion or discourses on sex work or trafficking work. For example, once someone shared about the Saudi Arabia case, how the women were taken away, but necessarily it is always the case can be different, but it's of the assumptions of sex work, something which is very the very polluted, something which will pollute our country, has been so available, but still there is an entire industry which is, I will just call it like an industry. It's wrong to say it as industry, but the continuation happens. So the question is our state makes it very important to criminalize people who are part of the industry, rather than they going back and working on themselves to look at if somebody is getting trafficked, where were you all, like where is the
Yeah.
concept of
Right.
prevention, where the questions of prevention, where does the word prevention in your dictionaries go? So
Mm.
you are criminalizing the person after the person got inside the certain, like
Exactly.
work environment. So like, yeah, we like I felt like let's not always have the idea of how vulnerability and exploitation is related to the body. So the body,
Mm.
like embodiment, and how materialization and like, abjection of bodies are created. And like we need to like have a broader, while we are looking at sex workers, we also need to think it like not something, like we say that the state is moralizing it, but while we go to the field to study them, even we end up moralizing them.
Yes, yes, a
And it
lot.
always
And
asks
that's
the
why,
other,
yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, that's what I felt like saying, because listening to the question, the
Mm.
idea of agency completely like moves out of the discourses, and somehow it's about exploitation more than somebody having their right to choose a job.
Correct, correct,
Like
correct.
that is something which is very important. And like, and articulations of Sheila Jeffrey and the multiple authors, that feminist authors who she has included, gives us the image of, like, the industry which is polluted, like,
Mm.
and that is
Mm.
it. And it's always the state who will go and work out the pollution, while the who does the research, who is bringing the story out,
Mm.
all this, the entire chain and the process and the hierarchy which forms while going
Correct.
through this process is never questioned. Like
Yeah.
I believe, like we, like right now when we are studying about sex work or we're talking about trafficking, the starting point should be ask, like the stakeholders, for example the state,
Mm.
where was you when a child was trafficked at one point of time in their life? Where is the prevention gone? And these are discourses which are happening in United Nations and the very recent,
Everywhere. Mm.
everywhere. And these
Everywhere.
questions are like very important to like address. And I feel
Yeah.
like agency is something which we as feminist researchers should not forget. Like,
And I always believe that any student, any researcher who wants to do authentic research should see facts just as facts, your own understanding, your own baggage of ideas and concepts and where you come from. You need to keep it aside. We always say that you need to be totally non-biased and, all those kind of things. But at the same time, there a lot is happening at the back of your mind, so you need to have very clear vision to see facts as facts. Yes, sex work definitely has an angle of trafficking, but entire sex work is not trafficking. There is a voluntary entry into trafficking. So, you need to have these facts very clearly in front of you. Otherwise, you are going to take some stand. So taking that stand and not remaining open and not remaining flexible when it comes to working with sex workers, I think it makes a one-sided view towards sex work and their impact. So it's very important to remain open and flexible at the same time, with just seeing facts as facts with your naked eyes. That's very important.
thank
Uh,
you, ma'am. Your talk was very
yeah,
helpful.
I have a question from Nishi. She's saying that yeah, the thing which I have said, that beautifully woven into our culture. But my question is, wasn't that practice exploitative? Now, to answer your question, Nishi, exploitation with women, with human beings, and particularly with women, um, it's always there. We just can't deny. And I just address this particular change in trend of sex work, which has happened from the pre-British era to after British era, because it was really culturally woven into our, in our society. It was a blend of all other systems and practices. Sex work was very, very effectively blended in our culture. It was there. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that there was no exploitation. Exploitation is there in all forms of sex work, in all the time zones which we come from. But that doesn't mean that it's only exploitation. If you see the history of sex workers getting recognition by the kings and the knights and the society at large, the opportunities they used to get. I'm not glorifying here, okay? I'm just trying to make my point clear that you can see both the things. I'm not denying exploitation, but at the same time, you also need to understand and accept the fact that entire sex work is not exploitation. There are many angles and layers to it. We really need to see through it properly. So that was my stand.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I have one question. So actually, it's not really a question, but just I wanted to ask you to throw some light on the intersectionality between caste and sex work, because as you pointed out that how the Devdasi system was banned but it was still practiced. So both Uma Chakravarti and Nivedita Menon, they point out in their works that how it was banned only among the upper caste Devdasis, and the lower caste Devdasis was still pushed into the system. So I wanted you to put some like
Definitely. And thank you, Natasha, for raising this, because it has always been another debate between the feminist activists who are supporting sex workers' right-based movement and among the Dalit feminists, because this has been a debate. Another question usually getting asked that who is leading the movement of sex workers. This is a question asked to all the activists who are engaged with sex workers right-based movement, because this is a fact that the sex workers, I'm talking specifically about female women who are entering into sex work. It applies to transgenders also and male sex workers also, for your information. But the persons who enter into sex work either by their own choice or getting trafficked or enter because of different traditions like Devdasi, they are from the lower economic and in the caste system, they are from the scheduled caste and tribe communities, definitely. And that makes the entire profession very complicated and debatable among the feminists, because it has been always a debate among Dalit feminists and sex workers activists that, and there are ample incidences. I don't have that much time to give you all the examples of it, but it has always been a debate that the Dalit feminists always blame few feminists in India who are working with sex workers, that you are glorifying sex work, you are glorifying voluntary entry of sex workers into sex work because you want to keep them into that phase. You want to keep them in that kind of life, very miserable and very deprived kind of life. So this is a debate, and this is still going on. But that's why I always appeal to any person who wants to understand sex work and sex workers' lives and the entire layers of sex workers, that you don't come with your baggage, you don't come with your background, you just sit with the woman who is with you, who is doing sex work. Try to understand her real voice. That matters a lot, because ultimately it's their life, they are going to live their own lives, not you. So you always remain as an outsider, whether you are a Savarna feminist activist or a Dalit feminist activist, it doesn't matter. When you are sitting with a sex worker, her identity is different than yours. Her baggage, her life is different than yours. So you need to listen to her, what she's saying, and that conveniently get not recognized by many activists. Sorry to say, but that's the fact.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, I have a question. So, will the decriminalization of sex work kind of invisibilize the human trafficking aspect of it?
No, I don't think so, because and that's why I say that we need to have stricter laws to prevent trafficking. At the same time, we need to have decriminalization of sex work, because sex work and trafficking should be dealt totally separately. Otherwise, see, because trafficking happens not only for sex work, it happens for forced labor, it happens for organ removal, it happens for so many other bonded labor, so many things, pornography, so many things. So not just for sex work, So we need to understand, and it doesn't mean that if we are decriminalizing sex work, that means we are promoting trafficking. No, we are not at all promoting trafficking. We are saying stricter laws for prevention, not for sex workers considering as traffic victims and either sending them to correction homes or to the jail. No.
Is there any question again?
Ma'am, I have a question or a point to say in terms of the whole trafficking debate and its writing of it and the legal framework. I wrote read an article on how the Nepali women's migration to India, how it's been many a time labeled as trafficking, and how it actually restrict the whole mobilization of women at some point. And at the same time, how because of the labeling of the whole trafficking thing, Nepali women's mobilization is restricted, and there is a double imposition of certain kind of a patriarchal rule on them. And at the same time, the imagery of India as the enemy or vice versa is being framed as well. So I'm connecting to that in the sense that how language itself is been patriarchally structured in that way, that in various legal framework, that that connection between how trafficking and sex work is being connected, it itself again restricted, I feel, the whole women's mobilization at many ways. It's just a thought that came.
Yeah, definitely. Because, in legal definition, in law, whatever Indian laws we have around sex work or around trafficking, it never even mentioned the term sex work. It always say prostitution and traffic victims. So there we stand. And then, so all these issues of migration, especially when you raise the issue of women from Nepal, it is a fact. I will recommend you to go through the National Network of Sex Workers website. You will find a report called Rated. We have done a 3-year study. We have tracked the women who have been so-called rescued, and we have tracked them for 3 years. And that was a massive study which we have done in different parts of India, in few states. And it's very interesting to read that report. It clearly showed that not only that, but there are several other research you can find out that the women who are coming from Nepal to do sex work in India, they are all not traffic victims. The women who are doing sex work, they go back to their native places in Nepal once or twice in a year, and they ask the women and they bring them. Now, the entire definition of third party in the legal framework in Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, the third party means defined as a trafficker. So a person who is bringing a person along to do sex work is treated as trafficking. It might be a fact that the woman who has gone back to her village might have explained what she is supposed to do when she is coming with her to India. There are several narratives you will find out getting documented with so many organizations in India who has clear narrations and clear statements by the women who came from Nepal that they know what they were supposed to do. They know that they are going to enter into sex work. They know that they are going to stay into that particular red light area. So it is always a mix, and it's very difficult to articulate it in the entire legal framework. So it always big confusion for even for the activists and the people who are working with sex workers. And another understanding people don't want to get is, okay, the woman might have entered into sex work by trafficking, but after she has working as a life as a sex worker, after a few years, if you're going and asking her history, like how she entered into sex work, she might have entered by trafficking. But what is her current status? What is her current assumption? What is her current ideology? What is her current decision about her life? Nobody wants to ask. So once a traffic victim can't live like her entire life as a victim, you need to understand her realities. That same applies to the women from Nepal, not only from Nepal but from Bangladesh also. We have so many women coming from Bangladesh in India. All are not traffic victims, but at the same time, all are not entering sex work voluntarily. And how you will make sense of it is a big debate. And that's why when it comes to sex work trafficking, migration is a very, very important component, needs to be considered. And really, especially for women, safe migration, we always speak about this term. We always say that safe migration should be there, but how to make it safe? That law doesn't give those answers. So unless we have very stricter laws around trafficking and safe migration, defining again these two things, it's going to be very, very difficult and critical for our understanding towards trafficking, migration, and sex work, these three things. So, yeah. And, the government, what they decide, the government of both the states, they decide something. And when it comes to ground, the things are very different. So, when and the current scenario of our neighboring countries and our relationship with our neighboring countries, I think we all are aware about. No need to even, mention those things which are happening. So, yeah, it's a very difficult state right now.
Anybody has any question? Hello? Over to Sujata ma'am. Hello, Sujata ma'am.
I'm unmuting. I was muted. Okay. Yeah, it's really, like what the law is, what are the provision is much more different than what the reality is, as you're saying. And I'm just taking it what you said was like what happens at the upper and what level and what happens at the ground is the one should be the same. Like on the basis of a ground, the thing should be done. That is, we see it in all the areas, not only with the sex workers, but even I think on all the social issues. This is the thing, that what you see in the ground is much, much different than what it was projected or represented and what is done on it. And again, the tendency, what we see now is making the laws without consulting for whom it has been made. And that leads to the more problems actually.
Yeah.
So this is all the reality is, but what we need to understand is and analyze, why it's happening and work on it, not to have it. So that's the only thing that we can do it, I think. It was like very informative with the respect to what was expecting was not only the law provision, law you can read it from the Bare Act also, but what happens in the ground and what are the various viewpoints on it. And even among the activists, how the opinions differ, and then it's up to you to how to view it and what is your own position on it and how to go about it. One of the things also you mentioned was about the changing trends, which I think had over the decades we have observed, when those who are working in the area for those last few decades have definitely noticed it. And also I think it is reflected in the, the way of handling these issues also. Because your understanding with it differs and your handling would also differ. That is also, I think, was a very good take from this talk as such. Does anybody else have any suggestion? Otherwise, we'll move on towards winding it up. Hello? Any responses or any questions from the audience? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have been trying to actually
Sanchita?
yeah, this is Sanchita.
Yeah.
I actually have been trying to articulate this question, but I'm not able to. So I hope that Tejaswi ma'am will make some sense out of it. Firstly, thank you so much, ma'am, for the talk. It was quite informative. Ma'am, so I was wondering that is it possible to look sex work in isolation? I mean, we talk about sex work and then we talk about trafficking, and of course, then like you said, that sex work is not same as trafficking. Not we were talking about agency, but then who are these sex workers? Is it possible to look at sex, quote unquote, work without delving into the intersections of, say, class, caste, and who are these women, and do they not get involved in sex work because they are stripped of that agency to make choices for themselves? They do not have enough resources. Like, I don't think many women wake up one day and go on to become a sex worker. So so how do we deal with the sensitive word like agency here? I hope I have been able to articulate.
Yeah. I'm getting it. What you want to say. See, basically, we can't see sex work in isolation, not at all. So intersectionality is the fact when it comes to sex work. And as you rightly said, the choices the women make. It's see, even the choices we make, it's a process. We don't decide one day and do something, the same applies to sex workers. Now, if you interact with the sex workers who have entered voluntarily, again, the definition of voluntary entry sex work can be another debate. I'm not denying that too. But same question if you ask a person who is working in a call center. Now, the stigma attached to a sex worker and the stigma attached to a call center person is going to be different. There is no stigma attached to a person who is working in call center. But why you are doing sex work and why you are working in a call center or why you are working in an IT industry? The answer is because I want to earn. Because I want to earn a sustainable livelihood option. I need to feed my family. Same answers sex workers will give you. That doesn't mean that they don't have opportunities. That doesn't mean that a person who is working in a call center doesn't have opportunities. That doesn't mean that a person working in IT doesn't have other opportunities. But to make a choice out of that opportunities, definitely when it comes to that strata of our society who is very disadvantaged socially and economically, the choices are limited. And within those limited choices, when a woman decides to get into sex work, it is a process decision. It is not an impulsive decision. That's what I just want to express myself in that way. And this is also another question. In one talk, one person has asked me that, do you feel that sex workers enjoy what they do? Now, how one can answer this question, because the question is the question is asked from that person's own thought towards sex worker. How a person who is working in IT can answer this question? You say, I'm working like a dog, and you're asking me this question if I enjoy it. Who cares if I enjoy it or not? I'm getting money and I'm taking care of my family. That's when the priorities are such. What we are going to debate about when people are thinking about their survival and their survival of their families in slightly better way, in their limited options, what they will do. So when we speak about agency, you ask a sex worker, can she define what we mean by agency? For her, her agency is to take some decisions which she may not be able to take when she's not earning. As simple as that. So I know it's very difficult to explain. It's difficult to digest also, and it's very difficult to look at this particular issue in a very comprehensive manner. But again, I will definitely say that we need to see facts. So the fact is that there are traffic victims, so-called. I don't like the term victims because they are human beings, and you don't consider them as victims and keep them into that phase. But at the same time, people are entering into sex to live their livelihood, to live their lives in a better way, slightly better way. Yeah. That's
The
also
whole
fact.
thing that it is related to the morality sort of a thing, and that is why it is the one which is difficult to digest. Like the view, seeing that it is a work, it's a kind of a job.
Yeah, I don't think it is about morality, but I didn't mean it in the perspective of, a morality. It is basically commodification, right? Offering some kind of services in exchange of money. So at the end of the day, that work is commodification only. So I know that it's a very one way to put it, that one is working at this place and earning money, and one is, indulging is not the right word here, in getting involved in sex work and earning money. But then again, it Tejaswi ma'am said a couple of minutes back that one of the students asked her if that person enjoys the work. So, if that person is indulging in that same work over and over and over again, I think the line between consent and things like that, they also get blurred. It's not like every day you want to do it. No, it's not like you give the consent to the consumer every day, but then you do it every day. Right.
Yeah.
So I think I was trying to look at it that way, but yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, so same thing apply for sex workers, no? So same thing, because it's very difficult for us because of all these aspects to consider sex work as a profession or sex work as a business or sex work as work. And we are trying to reach at that. Even to tell you, this could be my last point because I know it's see, even among us, like the activists who are working with sex workers, now we are also having a huge discussion in our own language. Like, we are trying to discuss and debate and get into clear understanding about whether we should use the term sex work or whether we should use the term persons given sexual services. We are into this discussion right now, because when you say work and worker, there are so many angles. Like, then who will be the employee? What will be the wages? What will be the minimum rate, and what will be the earning, and all those kind of, and what will be the industrial norms and regulations and all. When you mention sex work as work, and when you say that sex workers are workers, but when you say service providers, the entire things will change. So this debate and discussion is going on in our own group also, whether to say sex work or sexual service providers.
Very true. I think we need to wind up. So this is the one which you said, that it's unending thing and there are so many angles to it and various views also. Each view will have a validity on their own point of view. So there's no end to it. Shall I request Inaya to wind it by giving vote of thanks?
Yes, ma'am. We had interesting talk on sex work and law today. Question and answer session was very thoughtful. Session on voluntary sex work was particularly great. I am thankful to Tejaswini Sevekari ma'am.
Tejaswi.
Tejaswi. Yeah.
I'm thankful to Tejaswi Sevekari ma'am for minutely described talk. Center is thankful to her and students for such an informative session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.